Good evening. My guest this evening is Gerald Garcia. He is the editor and the publisher of the Tucson Citizen. He is the first Hispanic editor-publisher of a general interest newspaper in the United States of America. He is married his college sweetheart, and he came here for the Gannett Company from Capital Communications Company, excuse me. I think broadcast, you think communication.
Right.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
You started out 17 years ago in this business doing what?
I was a sports writer. I loved sports. I was a participant, and I felt that that's what I wanted to do. When I was in high school, I was in my high school newspaper, and I had my first mentor, a lady by the name of Jean DeGaulle, who we all affectionately call Miss D. She said, "You have a knack for writing, and you know sports well because you have participated, and I think that it would be wise for you to go to college and get a journalism degree." I came from a poor family, and I had to work in the oil fields in South Texas, where I came from. And I said, I think that I want to be in petroleum engineering because I don't want to be the guy with a shovel. I want to be with the guy in the pickup giving the orders. And she said, well, you do whatever you want to do. I get to college, and when I get to integral calculus, I could spell it, but I couldn't do it. So I changed to journalism.
Is she alive today?
Yes, she is.
I bet she's bursting at the seams knowing that you're the first publisher.
Well, we've had communications, Miss D and I have, and she's proud. But she's also proud of a lot of other students who she had and who she advised and counseled about what they should do with their lives. And she's a marvelous lady, and every time that I visit my hometown in Texas, Beeville, Texas, I try to stop by and visit with her and just share some of the things that we have done, and my family and I have done, and we have been able to accomplish.
Southwestern boy all the way.
Well, we stayed in this part of the country most of our lives.
I think people who are here don't ever want to leave. Of course, that's a little bit prejudiced on my part, but
I think that the perception that we have attained in the 14 months that we have been here, Joyce and Jerry and Wendy and I, is that this is a marvelous community. We have taken the attitude, though, Ellen, that the next place we are is always the best, and Tucson happens to be the next place.
You mentioned your wife, Joyce, and you were college sweethearts, but you must have been quite a date to impress her, because what were the odds?
Well, I went to Texas A&M, and at the time it was an all-male institution, and Joyce was the first class of, it wasn't the first class of women to be enrolled, and there was 10,000 men and 130 women. And how we came together, it's a long story, but it was something that happened, and we impressed each other.
You must have had a pretty good line.
I think I still do.
All right, how did your line get you from a sports writer to being the first Hispanic publisher in the United States of America? I don't want to give you a swelled head, but that's pretty impressive.
Well, thank you very much, and it happened through a lot of hard work, but it also happened because I was lucky and I had people above me who believed in me and who deemed me qualified to have this job. A lot of people want to do and achieve a lot of things in life, and I have the same ambitions that a lot of those people have. The problem with them who have not achieved and the results for me have been that there has been someone higher who deemed me as qualified to hold a job of this stature. And after Ms. D came Dr. David Bowers in college, who held my hand a lot of times and said, "You're going to make it, kid. Don't worry about it," and advised me for a long period of time after I graduated. And then came Jim Hale. I was just a sports writer in a department in Fort Worth, Texas, minding my own business, trying to do whatever I wanted to. And one day, this mountain of a man walked in who was going to be taking over this newspaper. And he pointed his finger at me and went like this, and I said, yes, and I was scared to death. And he said, "How would you like to be the sports editor?" And I said, "Is that the way it works in this business?" And so he made me the sports editor, and then eventually I became his right-hand man in a lot of other jobs. Ultimately ended up together in Kansas City, Missouri, being the editor of that newspaper for him, and then his assistant publisher at Kansas City. And that led to this job here eventually. But if it hadn't been for people like Jean DeGaulle and Dr. David Bowers and Jim Hale, I wouldn't be here. And that's, you know, that's I think that you have to have those people there to guide you and to show you and to open the way for you and to be leaders for you.
Except that you had a quality that we'll come back, notice how I got that in, we'll come back and talk about, but that is the ability to bridge the gap from being a good journalist into being a manager. And those skills don't necessarily translate easily. We'll come back and find out how he did it. Gerald Garcia, editor and publisher of the Tucson Citizen, is my guest. We were at the point in your career where you had been taken into management. Now, being a good journalist and being diligent and working hard and everything like that is well and good, but to have management skills, which involves personnel and finance and probably a bunch of things that, that you could fill in, how did you do that and how difficult was that for you?
It was extremely difficult. First, coming from the background that I came in where I had no training whatsoever in that, one of the things that I always did when I was just a sports writer and when I was just a writer was that every time a manager did something, I said, if I ever get to that position, I'm not going to do that if they did it what I considered to be wrong. If they did it if they did something that was right, I put it in my mind and said, if I ever get to be to that position, I'm going to do it the way they did it. So I learned from Ms. D some of the skills that she had as a teacher and how she counseled students and how she took me in and sometimes held me at arm's length because of things that I would do and didn't want to share things with me, or sometimes when she would just bring me close and share those things, or whenever she scolded me for things that I did. And I learned from Dave Bowers how he handled college students, and we were supposedly a little bit more mature at that time. And then I really learned from Jim Hale. And if it had not been for him, I mean, he put me in a job that was difficult as a sports editor of that newspaper with no experience whatsoever. But yet he had trust in me, and he told me, whatever you need, just call. Whatever, it doesn't make any difference, whatever time of day. Not only to me, but the other people who are above you. And I learned from him, his techniques and how he did it. And really his way of being very autonomous with his managers. He just wants to know what is happening and what he needs to know. He doesn't have to have his finger in everything that's involved. And I think that from that, I was able to pick up a great deal.
Did you find yourself faced with the situation, coming from a poor background, that when it came time to fire someone who really deserved to be fired, what were your feelings?
I know that you don't know the story, and it's just what has happened, but I was known as the hatchet man in Kansas City, and I dismissed a great deal of people in one day, and it caused a great deal of consternation, not only for me personally, but for the people who I had to terminate, and also for the company. But it was something that we had to do. It was a newspaper that was floundering, and there was some people working there who were not qualified to be working there, and we had to do it. The fact of the matter is that there was someone higher than me, Jim Hale, who said, we have to do this, and here are all the resources. Here's all the lawyers, here's all the personnel files, here's all the personnel people, here's all the way how to do these things, and you study this, and they will guide you, and then the guts are going to have to come from you. Everything else comes from all of these people here, but when it gets down to do it, it has to come from you. And so we had to do it, and we reduced an employee census there from a very high number and took almost 20% of the employees. And it was a very difficult thing to do. I didn't sleep for many days prior, and I didn't feel very good for many days afterward. And when I think about it now, it was really probably the hardest thing that I have ever had to do. I really learned there something about myself, whether I was going to make it in this business or not, and whether I was going to achieve anything higher or not.
That's the true test of a manager, doing what goes against the human grain sometimes because it's necessary, or else the doors will close permanently.
I think that the doors would have closed. I think that Jim Hale would have found out that I wasn't able to grow any further, and that I had reached the level that I was going to get, and that was it. I have to tell you a wonderful story about when I left the company, and when I left Capital Cities to go work for Gannett. It was about the 5th or 6th job that I had been offered, and this one, Mr. Hale and I kind of realized that this one was going to be it. And finally, the letter came with what the employment conditions were, and we were almost setting ourselves that I was going to leave Capital Cities and leave him, and leave the wonderful relationship that we had. And I knew where my place was with him. I knew when to stand at the front and take all the heat. I knew when to stand beside him and accept all the glories and all the heat at the same time. And I knew when to stand behind him and let him just be glorified by everything that was happening. And he taught me that. I learned that from him. So the letter came, and you could set your watch. He came to the office at 9 o'clock in the morning. That's when he came to the office, and he walked in. He's this mountain of a man, real tall, and he goes into his office, and I walk in, and I say, I received this from Gannett today. And he looked at it, and he would never say things for a long period of time, and he read it. He put it down on the desk, and what seemed like an eternity, he finally got up and walked around and grabbed me by the arm and started squeezing really hard, and then didn't say anything. And then he just turned around and got his coat and left for the day. You know, and it just showed the true character of the man. I mean, how sensitive he was and how much we cared for each other, but yet that the separation had to come.
Had to come.
Yeah.
We'll be back in a moment. My guest is Gerald Garcia. He is the editor and the publisher of the Tucson Citizen. We're going over his early history, and he's come a long way. I know you have strong feelings about helping the Mexican-American community achieve stronger goals. Would you like to share some of your thoughts with us on that?
Oh, I think that I surely would, Ellen, and I appreciate you asking me. It's a commitment that I have had. When I came to this town, and I really love Tucson, and it's just, and it's been wonderful for all of us, and not only wonderful for my family and myself, but for the newspaper, and they have just accepted us and treated us well. But when I came here, I think that there was a lot of people in the Hispanic community who felt that I had not had any of the sensitivity or any of that awareness or any of the education or any of the fights that they have had here. And I remember having a meeting with a group of them one time, and they were scolding me a little bit. Thinking that I was just another corporate clone that had been sent in here.
Or a figurehead.
Our figurehead. And I just sat there and listened for a while, and they bitched a little bit, and they complained, and they told me these horror stories, and I said, I just had one thing to say. I said, I've been here, and I think it had been about 2 months at the time, and I said, I can assure you folks that I wasn't born 2 months ago. I've been through all these battles. The only thing that changes is the faces and the numbers on the back. And that's really true. Every town that I have been, there have been the same type of concerns, the same types of commitments from me and from the newspaper, and we will do everything that we can, but not just for the Hispanic community. We're here to serve the entire community, and we have to have a newspaper that does that and reflects the diversities of this community. And I, with Ed Parker and Julie Drown and some people at the United Way, Mary Peachin and Octavio Molera and Joel Valdez and some of these other wonderful people of this town came together and formed a group called Acción 80s, in which we are now working together and trying to put some bylaws and doing an incorporation. So eventually, this will be the umbrella group that will represent the entire Hispanic community in this town, and this will be the spokes group for the community. And those are the type of things that we want to achieve. We call it Acción 80s because I didn't think that it could be achieved in 1982 or 83 or 84 or 85, but this was a long-term commitment for all of us, and that it was going to take several years into this decade before we would achieve some of the goals that we set for ourselves.
Coming from that background that you have told us about, what are your thoughts when you go into a union negotiation?
Well,
does that
no. I'm fortunate that we only have one bargaining unit here. There have been others where I have been, But the fact of the matter is that I just don't think that it is my jurisdiction to negotiate with a union. I think that it is the jurisdiction of the person that we deem qualified to negotiate with the union. I would strip the managerial abilities of all of those people, and here the production director, in the case because we have a union in the production area, I would strip completely the jurisdiction of that person and that man, and I would just let him hang out there by himself if I was involved in negotiations, because any time a grievance came, they would come directly to me and just flank him. And that's not a good management technique in my part. So every negotiation is given to our lawyers and the people who represented us at the bargaining table. And if the union wants to see me, they will see me out on the street or someplace else, but not at the bargaining table, because I will not negotiate with them. It's just not right. It is not the proper thing to do. And Jim Hale told me so.
You could do a song on that and come up for an Emmy next year. Jim Hale told me so. This might be a good time to ask you, what is the difference between an editor and a publisher? Or do you know?
Well, that's difficult to say. When I went to work for Gannett, I told them that I did not want to go to work for them unless I had the dual title and the dual responsibility. Because I still had a place in my heart for the newsroom, and that I wanted to have influence on how the news was covered and influence in the editorial policy of the newspaper. The publisher's jurisdiction most of the time is, yes, to provide influence on the editorial policy. But most publishers who I have been associated with in the past have been more concerned with the bottom line and the accounting aspects and the business aspects of the newspaper. And so in reality, I wear a dual hat. And I do spend a lot of time on the financial end and in community relations, but I also spend a great deal of time trying to set the attitude and the tone in the newsroom of how I think the community should be covered and how we should handle stories, and also what direction we should go with our editorial policies, with feedback and input and a great deal of advice and counsel from the Dale Waltons of the newsroom and the Ted Craigs and the people who I have a great deal of respect, and the Dick Bonniers.
We'll be back in a moment, and we'll talk about the changed direction of the editorial page of the Tucson Citizen. Gerald Garcia is my guest. He's the publisher, the editor of the Tucson Citizen. The Citizen really shocked me, I must tell you, this year. I turned to the editorial page. I wanted to see who the Citizen was supporting and which issues they were supporting. And I noticed that the Citizen, who always been thought of as the Republican and the conservative newspaper, supported David Bradshaw over John Mowiney for Senate, Democrat over the Republican, was for a bilateral nuclear freeze, supported Garcia, the Democrat, for Attorney General, and I practically dropped my paper.
I hope that you maintain your subscription, though.
Oh, yes, I was very pleased.
Well, first of all, we don't support anyone, we just endorse them.
Yeah.
And our endorsements were different. They were different because we have taken a different approach, I think, at how we go about analyzing political races or analyzing any of the issues. I think that in the past we have been, if a person had a Republican label or a conservative label, they immediately were endorsed by the Citizen, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It provides.
But it didn't necessarily mean that it was good.
Right, that's true.
Yeah, that's what I was really referring to. Not that I was particularly thrilled with the people. It didn't matter. It was the fact that the Citizen was looking at both sides, or both people, or three people.
Well, it's important that we do look at all the issues, and that we make decisions on the issues only, and not on not on personalities or emotion. And I think that we had allowed our emotions to dictate what we were going to do, and not only our emotions, but our biases and our prejudices, and how we felt about certain things personally. And I think that that is not our mission. Our mission is to be responsible editors and to publish a newspaper which will provide and suggest and be informative and entertain and I think that that's where we're going. Just because there were some people whose endorsements, whose names were in the endorsements had carried a D beside their name, that doesn't necessarily mean that that we have shifted to the Democratic Party. Those people are still, basically, when you really look at them, are conservative people, and we continue to lean to the right, and we will continue to lean to the right. But we will not be that way, and we will not be that way as Brand X is. But we will look at the issues more carefully, and we have an editorial board which is sensitive to that and is knowledgeable of my thoughts, and we sit around and talk and discuss and call people and ask for opinions and ask for suggestions, and then we go around and raise our hand which way that we want to do it. I think that you picked some ones that were probably the ones that caused the most consternation. In retrospect, we were wrong with Mr. Garcia. We should not have endorsed the Democrat in that particular election, or let's put it this way, we should not have endorsed him in that particular election, regardless of what his political affiliation is.
How was the vote arrived at? Were there
Well,
how many people?
we interviewed him in the editorial board, and there was 5 votes.
And so majority?
It's a majority rule.
So you don't get any brownie points for being the publisher?
Well, some people say that I get 2 votes because I am the editor and publisher, but that is not the case. I have never used a hammer.
What if you raise your eyebrows? Does that count for...
Well, no, because I am the last one to vote.
Oh, so you're truly democratic.
Yes, and when I don't start on the right-hand side all the time and go around this way or the left, I might start over here in the middle and say, what do you think, and just pick someone at random. So we're a truly democratic process.
You get wonderful passing marks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me.
Oh, it was delightful. Please invite me again.
All right, will do. My guest is Gerald Garcia, the editor and the publisher of the Tucson Citizen.
North Tucson